To Vojin and to Petar, thank you very much for the invitation and for this conference and the possibility to stay in Belgrade. So contrary to the title and contrary to the extended version of this paper, I will focus basically on one issue related to cloning and precisely the issue that regards the question of autonomy. And as the objection says, autonomy here concerns the future child, that, as the objection says, more probably will be damaged. So the autonomy of the future child, say the objectors, will be damaged. We will see later, in fact, autonomy is here concerned in another way as well, autonomy as freedom to procreate. So there are two possibilities to look at the question of autonomy in the debate on abortion. But let's start with the objection, with the position expressed by those who oppose cloning. A common way to express the objection is to say that cloning strengthens the idea that some people can have a total control of other people's lives. This idea, says the objection, strengthens or even suggests the wish to control another person's life, precisely the life of the future child. The objection appears in two versions. In the first version, the objection says that cloning strengthens this idea because of the wrong belief that genetic control of someone's life is enough to establish the total control of her personality. The idea is based on a mistake, the implausible belief in the thesis of strong determinism. But nevertheless, there might be something in the illusion that cloning suggests that tends to increase the ambition of having a total control of other people's lives and act consequentially. In its second version, the argument says that cloning can augment, increase the ambition to control other people's lives, because it gives a further basis for this attitude by giving it additional instruments. Here it is assumed a plausible weak thesis of genetic determinism. Contrary to what I wrote in the draft I sent to you later, a few days later, I start thinking what I now think, that there is a too quick answer of supporters of cloning to this objection. The answer usually focuses on the version based on strong determinist thesis and says that because of the fact that genetic determinism is not true, the ambitions of parents to use cloning for channeling the lives of children will disappear after failures. So, for example, Elvstrom says that it is impossible to reproduce Einstein, and people will see this and then even the ambition will disappear. Harris, in his 2004 book on cloning, says the same in relation to Lenin example, and I said the same in the earlier draft of this paper, wrongly. In other words, the reply says that it is probable that the empirical evidence of the fact that cloning does not assure that the future person will be able to reproduce the features that are expected, for example, Einstein features, or Lenin features, or Michael Jordan features, or Monica Bellucci features, will oppose the motivation to apply cloning with such a desire. Certainly, people who expect too much from cloning and who are related to a strong thesis of genetic determinism, so the thesis that Einstein's, Lenin's, Jordan's, or Bellucci's genes will reproduce people with exactly their virtues, will be disappointed and such ambition will disappear. But it is important not to forget that for some time the ambition may be appealing, and that in that time clones might be under the pressure of other people's expectations. Moreover, there may be people with more rational expectations from cloning. That is, people who endorse a weak thesis of genetic determinism. That is, the thesis that genetic features are dispositions, and that consequentially a person with Jordan genes has greater possibilities to be a successful basketball player than a person with my genes. In fact, I was a failure. I tried to play basketball, but with very bad results. And that a person with Einstein genes has greater possibilities of being a successful scientist than a person with George Bush or Berlusconi's genes. Although I find not totally convincing the usual reply to the autonomy objection, it is important not to exaggerate the possible problems related to cloning. Parents who want to channel with their ambitions the lives of their children already exist. As a consequence, the real challenge is not cloning as such, but that of creating an environment in which there is a positive attitude toward autonomy and spontaneity among young members of society. Moreover, if the problem of parents who want to realize ambitions through children or want to transfer to children their ambitions persist, genetic enhancement or cloning might be even helpful. That is, it might be even better that parents can make use of the additional opportunity to optimize the talents of their children through genetic features than having education as the only resource, or training like in sport. In this case, children may have greater opportunities to be successful and therefore not to be frustrated. So here was the opponent's appeal to autonomy, but supporters of cloning frequently appeal to autonomy as well. The value of autonomy appears as the basic background of some authors who support cloning, as well as of some authors who oppose it, and for this reason it is important to discuss the proper endorsement of the value of autonomy in a democratic liberal society. Those who oppose cloning, as we have already seen, say that cloning risks to reduce the autonomy of future children. Those who support cloning appeal to autonomy in relation to procreative autonomy. The latter take procreative autonomy as an almost absolute right and defend cloning on this base. The former raise a challenge by saying that what is really at stake is not the right to procreative autonomy, but the right to control the development of the future children's lives, which in fact is not a right at all. For many, the right to procreative autonomy is not an absolute right, and one of its limits is represented by the duty to respect the autonomy of the child in her future development. Cloning appears to some as strongly related to a wish to restrict or even deny this autonomy, and therefore is not a legitimate form of reproduction. Such an endorsement of autonomy appears as illegitimate according to some authors who appeal to liberalism, who say that they are defending a liberal theory of justice. One of them is Chandran Kukathas, who in his book The Liberal Archipelago says that such an endorsement of the value of autonomy is deeply illiberal. Kukathas is discussing issues of multiculturalism, not issues of genetic technology. But I think that argumentation is relevant for this debate. It represents the endorsement of a value imposed to the whole society, inclusive of communities or people that do not embrace it, like many ethnic minorities or religious communities. The only legitimate liberal practice is to permit to each person and each community to live in conformity with their values, some of them being contrary to autonomy and strongly related to tradition or identity. This permission entails the right to inculcate traditional values or a firm identity to children. Any other form of politics represents an illegitimate interference of the state that in this way is not anymore liberal. I do not find this as a good view of liberalism, for the reason put forward by Brian Berry. I quote, "What is miscalled liberty is actually, in this case, power." In other words, Kukathas does not defend liberty, a concept that in the political sense applies properly to the protection of a reasonable and rational person from impositions, but power, that is, the possibility to impose a way of life to other individuals. In the same way, it seems to me that part of the defense of cloning offered by some is not a defense of liberty in the form of procreative liberty, but of power, precisely the possibility to strongly interfere with the future life of the child. Here it becomes central the issue about whether there may be valid motivations for cloning. So Philip Kitcher, for example, indicates three hypotheses. One is the case of parents who have a child in potential need of organs for transplantation. They can decide to make a child by cloning for available organs. Second, there is the case of a widow who lost her husband in a car accident and whose daughter was also severely damaged and is now facing an imminent death. The mother wishes to have a child by cloning in order to get continuity with this daughter. Third, we have the case of a lesbian couple. They wish to apply cloning in order to have children by their genetic material. According to Kitcher, the first two cases are situations in which a clear disrespect for the future person is shown, because she is obviously treated in an instrumental way. The third case seems the most plausible, because it is inspired by the usual legitimate motivation when a couple has a child. However, even in this case, Kitcher does not see a particular reason to make use of cloning instead of the already available means of assisted procreation. Apart from Kitcher's wrong interpretation of the third case, I think that we may imagine further several legitimate motivations for cloning. A list of them is provided, for example, by John Harris in his book on cloning, the one I mentioned earlier, the 2004 book published by Routledge. I remark some cases and also extend or add some cases to those indicated by Harris. Imagine a case where the possible father is not fertile because of the level of quality of his spermatozoids. In this case, the only possibility for the couple to have a child is to realize heteronymous assisted procreation. However, in this case, the child will have a biological relation with the legal mother only and with one person external to the family. This does not represent a problem for some families, but this might be felt as a problem by other families, and these families can overcome their problem. In the case of cloning of the father, there will be participation of both parents in the biological relation with the child. The father will give the genetic material for the reproduction, the mother will have the relation established in the process of gestation, as well as the related emotional relation. This may appear as a better solution for some families, and I do not see any motivation that can be classified as morally wrong in this case. The second possible motivation, analogous to the previous one, is represented by gay couples who want to have children. So the case of a lesbian couple may be imagined as particularly strongly analogous with the former case I indicated. The third possibility I'm going to mention is suggested by the brief appearance of a sect of people who said that they found a particular religious relevance in cloning. I refer to the Raelian community. Although I do not want to connect my argument with this particular sect that, as a matter of fact, appeared as a not serious phenomenon, it appears more important to me that we can imagine in principle a more serious possible religious group that attributes a high relevance to cloning. The freedom in matter of choice of religion is one of the most firmly declared rights in every free society that is respectful of rights, and I do not see any legitimate reason to declare as protected all the actually existing religions and to close at the same time the door to possible new religions. Here, it might be possible to state an objection that says that my proposal is too restrictive and discriminatory. Why are people permitted to reproduce without any specific authorization of control by sexual reproduction, while they have to get permission or must be controlled if they required assisted procreation, including cloning? In my opinion, it would have some positive aspects to check possible parents in general in order to increase the possibility that new children will be born in their best interest in appropriate conditions. However, to enforce this requirement would be too socially and personally invasive, and the benefits that might come from such a social policy would be smaller than the harms. It might be, on the other hand, easier and less invasive to apply some policies of control when people require medical help to reproduce. The reason for the distinction is therefore not discriminatory, but relies on conditions of applicability. And some specifications are needed at this point. First, I referred to motivations for cloning as relevant only so far as they can be symptoms of possible harms to the future child. So bad motivations are not a reason by themselves, but only as symptoms of what can happen. Second, I do not insist strongly on the requirement to check parents in cases of assisted procreation in general and cloning in particular. If the only available possibilities to do this would be too invasive in these cases, I renounce to this requirement for the same reason why I renounce to such requirements in cases of natural sexual procreation. Third, because of the non-identity problem, we must be careful not to be too restrictive. Denial of support, that is, prohibition of cloning, is legitimate only in the most extreme cases. Fourth, prohibition of cloning, that is, denial of support, is not the only possible reaction to worrisome motivations, that is, motivations that we can take as worrisome symptoms of a possible future scenario. Possible monitoring of parents after the birth can be one of the appropriate reactions. Now I have some slides on a slightly different issue. Is one of the many love affairs between feminism and conservatism, but I suppose it's better that I finish now with my paper. Thank you very much.